The soft, golden light of l'étoile did not so much illuminate the room as anoint it. It was a light that forgave wrinkles and flattered jewels, a carefully calibrated incandescence that made the heavy cream tablecloths gleam and the crystal water goblets fracture the world into 1,000 tiny, shimmering possibilities. Conversations were conducted in a low, conspiratorial murmur, the discreet percussion of silver on porcelain, the only sharp sound. This was not a place one came simply to eat. It was a sanctuary of wealth, a theater where New York's ruling class performed the quiet, effortless drama of their own importance. For Emma Charlotte, it was a laboratory. At 33, Emma wore the plain black uniform and sensible shoes of her trade, not as a costume, but as camouflage. Her auburn hair, which in another life was often styled in a way that spoke of quiet confidence, was pulled back into a severe, functional knot at the nape of her neck. Her face, devoid of makeup, was pleasant, but intentionally forgettable. Her hands, nimble and strong, were free of any jewelry, the nails clipped short and meticulously clean. For the past 2 weeks, she had been a ghost in the machine of l'étoile, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, and absorbing every detail with an intensity that would have terrified the restaurant's management had they noticed. Emma was not merely a waitress. She was, in the rarefied world of ultra-high-end hospitality, a legend known only by a pseudonym, the Sentinel. She was a diagnostician of luxury. Corporations, hotel groups, and investment consortiums paid her astronomical fees to embed herself within their flagship properties. She would work for weeks as a low-level employee, observing every aspect of the operation from the inside. Her final report, a document that could run to hundreds of pages, detailing everything from supply chain inefficiencies and staff morale to the precise thread count of the napkins, was considered the industry's holy scripture. A glowing report from the Sentinel could add millions to a brand's valuation. A negative one could topple a CEO. Her current client was the Beaumont Collection, a new and aggressively expanding luxury hotel group. Their crown jewel was to be a new flagship hotel in Manhattan, and L'Étoile was its intended restaurant. The patriarch, Charles Beaumont, had personally, through 3 layers of lawyers, commissioned her for this deep dive analysis before his company finalized the acquisition. He didn't want to buy a restaurant. He wanted to buy perfection. And after 2 weeks, Emma knew L'Étoile was anything but perfect. She watched Julian, the general manager, glide across the floor. He was a man made of oil and smiles, his suit impeccable, his manner a masterclass in obsequiousness. He exuded an aura of control, yet Emma had seen him in the back pantry, berating a young busboy named Miguel for a barely chipped plate, his voice a venomous whisper that made the boy flinch. She had seen him ignore the quiet pleas of his head sommelier, a brilliant woman named Sarah, to restock a critically low vintage of Burgundy because it would negatively affect his quarterly budget report. Julian managed numbers, not people. He cultivated a garden for the guests to admire, but he was poisoning the soil. Charlotte, Julian hissed as he passed her station, his smile never faltering for the benefit of the nearby tables. Table 12. The Hendersons. They're celebrating their anniversary. I want a complimentary dessert sent over. Make sure you mention it's from me personally. Of course, Mr. Davies, Emma replied, her voice the perfect blend of meekness and efficiency. She had already known it was the Hendersons' anniversary. She had overheard Mrs. Henderson mention it quietly to her husband when she first took their order. Emma had already planned to have the pastry chef add a small, elegant chocolate script to their dessert plate. Julian's directive wasn't about hospitality. It was about branding himself, ensuring his name was attached to the gesture. He was a parasite on the genuine efforts of his staff. Emma made a small, precise note in the tiny, leather-bound notebook she kept tucked in her apron pocket. It was her 3rd notebook for this assignment alone. The great bronze-handled doors of the restaurant swung open, and a palpable shift occurred in the room's delicate ecosystem. It was as if a barometric pressure drop had announced an incoming storm. Charles Beaumont entered first. He was a man in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of silver hair, and a face that looked as if it were carved from granite and determination. He moved with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who did not merely inhabit the world, but owned significant portions of it. Even in a room filled with power, his was of a different magnitude. Trailing in his wake was his daughter, Chloe Beaumont. Where her father's presence was a steady, gravitational force, Chloe's was a series of sharp, discordant notes. She was a beautiful girl of about 25, dressed in a glittering designer dress that seemed to be actively at war with the restaurant's understated elegance. A diamond necklace, far too large for the occasion, glittered aggressively at her throat. She swept her gaze across the dining room, not with appreciation, but with the bored, dismissive air of a queen reviewing subpar troops. "Table for two under Beaumont," she announced to the hostess, her voice carrying an octave too high, a sharp edge of impatience already present. The young hostess, flustered by the sudden arrival of the man whose name was essentially on her future paychecks, stammered. "Of course, Miss Beaumont, Mr. Beaumont. Your table is ready right this way." "No," Chloe said abruptly, pointing a long, perfectly manicured finger toward the prime corner booth. A plush, semicircular banquette that offered a panoramic view of the entire room and the glittering city beyond. "We'll take that one." "I'm terribly sorry, miss," the hostess began, her face paling. "That table is reserved for Senator Michelson. He is one of our most—" "And my father is Charles Beaumont," Chloe snapped, cutting her off. "He's about to own this place. I think that trumps your little senator. Move him." Charles, who had been surveying the room with a keen, analytical eye, finally turned his attention to the small drama. He placed a gentle but firm hand on his daughter's arm. "Chloe, that's not necessary. The table we reserved is perfectly fine." "But Daddy, that one is better," she whined, her voice reverting to a petulant, childish tone. This was the moment of truth for Julian Davies. A competent manager would support his hostess, honor the existing reservation, and handle the situation with diplomatic grace. Julian, however, saw his future boss. He scurried over, his face wreathed in a positively radiant smile. "Mr. Beaumont, a delight to have you with us. Miss Beaumont, you look stunning this evening." He shot a withering glare at the hostess. "Why is Miss Beaumont being given any trouble? Of course you can have the booth." He turned back to the hostess, his voice dropping to a low, menacing command. "Move the senator's reservation to table 14. Call his office and tell them there was a plumbing issue with the booth. Apologize profusely." The hostess looked as if she'd been slapped, but she nodded numbly. "Yes, Mr. Davies." Emma watched the entire exchange, her pen poised over her notebook. Julian hadn't just failed the test, he had set it on fire. He had insulted a U.S. senator, undermined his staff, and rewarded the worst kind of bullying behavior, all in a breathtakingly craven display of sycophancy. Charles Beaumont looked momentarily displeased by the fuss, a flicker of irritation crossing his strong features. But he allowed his daughter to lead him to the now commandeered booth. He was a titan of industry, but Emma saw in that moment a common, tragic flaw, a father's blind spot for his spoiled child. As fate, or perhaps the cruel logic of the universe would have it, the prime corner booth was in Emma's section. "Your server this evening will be Emma," Julian announced, gesturing toward her with a flourish. "She is one of our most experienced team members." He gave Emma a look that was both a warning and a threat. "Do not mess this up." "Wonderful," Chloe said, her tone dripping with sarcasm as she appraised Emma's simple uniform and plain face. She didn't even bother to make eye contact, instead addressing the room at large. "Let's hope she can keep up." The meal began with a series of small, calculated cruelties. Chloe demanded a specific brand of sparkling water from a remote Italian spring, which she then declared to be insipid and sent back. She quizzed Emma on the exact provenance of the sea bass with an air of smug superiority, clearly trying to trip her up. Emma, drawing on her encyclopedic knowledge, answered every question with calm, factual precision, which only seemed to irritate Chloe more. Charles, for his part, seemed preoccupied. He was on his phone for much of the time, speaking in low, clipped tones about logistics and contracts. He was treating this dinner as a business meeting, a final inspection of a potential asset, and seemed content to let his daughter handle the social particulars, oblivious to the quiet war she was waging. The first major battle was over the wine. "We'll have the 82 Cheval Blanc," Chloe declared, pointing at a line on the wine list. Sarah, the head sommelier, whom Julian had undermined earlier, approached the table. An excellent choice, Miss Beaumont. A truly legendary vintage. She presented the bottle with the reverence it deserved. The price tag for that bottle was over $7,000. Sarah performed the opening ritual with the grace of a surgeon, decanting the wine carefully to separate the sediment. She poured a small tasting for Chloe. Chloe swirled the dark liquid in her glass, held it to the light, and took a theatrical sniff. She sipped it, letting it rest on her palate for a moment. Then her face contorted into a mask of disgust. "It's turned," she announced loudly. "It's vinegar. Utterly undrinkable." Sarah's professional composure flickered for a fraction of a second. "Miss Beaumont, that's highly unlikely with this vintage. May I?" Chloe waved a dismissive hand. Sarah poured a minuscule amount into a clean tasting glass, her movements precise. She assessed the aroma, then took a delicate sip. Her expression remained neutral, but Emma, who had been trained to read the subtlest cues, saw the truth in her eyes. The wine was perfect. "I'm not detecting any signs of cork taint or premature oxidation, miss," Sarah said politely but firmly. "The wine is drinking beautifully. It has mature notes of leather and cedar, which is to be expected." "Are you calling me a liar?" Chloe's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Several nearby tables turned to look. "I know what wine is supposed to taste like. This tastes like dirty socks. You're clearly just trying to offload a bad bottle on us. Get your manager, now." Julian was at the table in an instant, his face a mask of concern. He didn't consult Sarah. He didn't taste the wine. He simply looked at Chloe's furious face and made a calculation. "My deepest apologies, Miss Beaumont. We will of course bring you another bottle immediately." He turned to Sarah. "Open another, and this time ensure it is up to the Beaumont standards." The unspoken accusation was clear. He then added, for Chloe's benefit, "And this bottle will, of course, be removed from your bill." "Both of them had better be," Chloe sniffed, sinking back into the booth with a triumphant smirk. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her professionalism a thin shield against the public humiliation. She had been overruled, her expertise dismissed, and the restaurant was now out thousands of dollars, all to appease a whim. She caught Emma's eye for a fleeting moment, and in that shared glance, a world of frustration and resignation passed between them. Emma made another note in her book. "Management actively devalues and humiliates expert staff to placate abusive guests. Massive financial and morale liability." Charles Beaumont finally looked up from his phone, seeming to grasp the tail end of the situation. "Chloe, was all that really necessary?" he asked, a hint of weariness in his voice. "Daddy, the wine was bad. Are you saying I should just drink bad wine?" she said, her voice laced with indignation. "This place is supposed to be the best. I'm just holding them to your standard." He sighed, a deep, tired sound. He didn't argue further. He turned his attention back to his phone, retreating from the unpleasantness. To Emma, it was a profound abdication of responsibility. He was the one with the power, yet he refused to wield it in his own family. The main courses arrived. Charles had the dry-aged ribeye, which he ate with methodical focus. Chloe had ordered the spaghetti al tartufo, a deceptively simple dish of handmade pasta tossed with butter, parmesan, and a lavish shaving of fresh white truffle. A food runner, a young man named Leo, placed the dish before her with a nervous smile. Chloe stared at the plate for a long, dramatic moment. She picked up her fork and listlessly pushed the pasta around. Emma stood a respectful distance away, observing, a pitcher of water in her hand, feeling the tension in the room coil tighter and tighter. She knew this was not over. This was a performance, and it was building to its crescendo. "This is it?" Chloe asked, her voice filled with a kind of theatrical disappointment. "This is the dish everyone raves about? It's just spaghetti." "It is prepared with imported Alba truffles, miss," Emma offered, her voice calm and even. "They are at the peak of their season." Chloe looked up at Emma then, truly looked at her for the first time, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. It was the smile of someone who had found a target for a rage that had little to do with pasta. "You know, I've been watching you all night," Chloe said, her voice low and conspiratorial, yet loud enough for the tables on either side to hear. Scurrying around in your sad little uniform. You probably think this is a glamorous job, don't you? Being around all this. She gestured vaguely at the opulent room. Emma remained silent, her expression unreadable. Her heart was beating a steady, cold rhythm. This was it, the moment of pure, unfiltered data. But you're nothing, Chloe continued, her voice gaining strength and venom. You're furniture that talks. You exist to bring me things. You bring me water. You bring me bread. You bring me this pathetic plate of noodles. Charles finally put his phone down, a frown creasing his brow. Chloe, that's enough. No, it's not enough. Chloe's voice rose, cracking with a sudden, vicious energy. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. I am so sick of mediocrity. I am sick of incompetent people in my orbit. People like you. She pointed her fork directly at Emma's chest. You will spend your entire life serving people like me. You will die poor and forgotten, and the only legacy you'll leave is a closet full of cheap, ugly shoes. You are a nobody, a servant. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Diners were frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. Every member of the staff stood motionless. It was a tableau of collective, horrified shock. Emma didn't flinch. She met Chloe's gaze, her own eyes steady and clear. Is there something wrong with the dish, miss? She asked, her voice still impossibly, infuriatingly calm. That calm was the final spark. It was a denial of Chloe's power, a refusal to break. For Chloe, it was the ultimate insubordination. Wrong with it, she shrieked, her face contorting in a rictus of pure rage. I'll show you what's wrong with it. And then she did it. With a swift, deliberate, and shockingly violent motion, Chloe Beaumont picked up the heavy porcelain plate of spaghetti and threw it. The arc of the pasta seemed to hang in the air for an eternity, a slow-motion cascade of white truffle, butter, and parmesan. It struck Emma square in the chest. The plate crashed to the floor, shattering with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Creamy sauce and strands of pasta splattered across her crisp black uniform, clung to her hair, and dripped down her face. For a long second, there was no sound at all, only the image of Emma standing there, covered in food, a single strand of spaghetti hanging from her cheek like a grotesque tear. The smell of truffle, once a scent of exquisite luxury, was now the smell of assault. Then the dam of silence broke. A collective gasp swept through the room. Julian Davies, his face the color of ash, started running toward the table. But it was Charles Beaumont who moved first. He was on his feet, his chair knocked over backward, his face a mask of thunderous, utter disbelief. He stared at his daughter as if he had never seen her before in his life. He looked at the mess on the floor, and then he looked at Emma. He stared at her face, at the sauce dripping from her chin, at her auburn hair matted with pasta. His eyes, which had been distant and preoccupied all night, were now laser-focused. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not pity, not anger, but a dawning, horrified recognition. His jaw went slack. The blood drained from his face. He took a hesitant step forward. Emma, he said, his voice a choked whisper. Miss Charlotte, is that you? The name, spoken with such reverence and shock, hung in the air. Julian Davies froze mid-stride, his mouth agape. Chloe, who had been panting with rage and adrenaline, stared at her father, her expression of vicious triumph dissolving into utter confusion. Daddy, what are you talking about? Do you know this thing? She demanded. Charles Beaumont ignored his daughter completely. His eyes were locked on Emma. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or worse, a god he had just mortally offended. He took another step closer, his voice dropping to a tone of awe and absolute terror. My God, he breathed, his voice cracking. It is you. You're the sentinel. He then turned to his stunned, uncomprehending daughter, his face a canvas of dawning horror and apocalyptic fury. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. His voice was unnervingly quiet, a low, guttural rumble that was more terrifying than any yell. Chloe, he said, the single word dripping with a weight she had never heard before. What have you done? He looked back at Emma, who had not moved, had not said a word, and then, in front of 200 of New York's most powerful people, Charles Beaumont, the titan of industry, addressed the sauce-splattered waitress with a voice of pure, unadulterated deference. "Ms. Charlotte," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "on behalf of my entire organization, I am so profoundly sorry. Please tell me what I need to do to fix this." The silence that followed Charles Beaumont's question was not just an absence of noise. It was a vacuum. It sucked the very air from the room, leaving a ringing in the ears of everyone present. The 200 patrons, a cross-section of Manhattan's financial, political, and cultural elite, were utterly captivated, their dinners forgotten. This was better than theater. Chloe Beaumont stared at her father, her mind refusing to process the scene. Her father, the man who commanded boardrooms, who made politicians tremble, who had never apologized to anyone in her living memory, was standing there humbled, speaking to a waitress as if she were a visiting head of state. "The Sentinel," Chloe echoed, the words a confused whisper. "What are you talking about? Daddy, she's a nobody. She provoked me. She was insubordinate." "Be quiet, Chloe," Charles snapped, not even looking at her. His focus was entirely on Emma, who was now calmly, deliberately plucking a piece of pasta from her hair. She dropped it onto the shattered remains of the plate on the floor. Julian Davies, the manager, was a statue of pure panic. His mind was a frantic cacophony of error messages. Beaumont, knows her, Sentinel, fix this? He saw his career, his bonus, his entire carefully constructed world teetering on the edge of a precipice. He did the only thing a man like him could do. He chose the wrong side. "Mr. Beaumont, sir, please, allow me to handle this," Julian stammered, rushing forward. He turned on Emma, his face a mask of faux outrage. You are fired, fired. You have harassed and provoked the Beaumont family beyond all measure. Get out of this restaurant right now. Security." Emma finally moved. She slowly raised her eyes and looked at Julian. The meek, subservient gaze of the waitress was gone. In its place was a look of such cold, analytical power that Julian physically recoiled. "You're firing me, Mr. Davies?" she asked, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the silent room. It was a new voice, clear and resonant, stripped of all feigned humility. "Yes, absolutely. Get out," he puffed, trying to regain control. "That's fascinating," Emma said, a hint of dry, academic curiosity in her tone. "Because according to my preliminary assessment, you abandoned your post as manager the moment the Beaumonts walked through that door. You have acted tonight not as a representative of this establishment, but as a personal valet to Miss Beaumont's temper." She took a small step forward, and Julian took an involuntary step back. "Let's review, shall we?" Emma said, her voice gaining a sharp, clinical edge. "At 7:15 p.m., you undermined your hostess and insulted a sitting U.S. senator to appease a guest's whim, violating at least 3 tenets of standard reservation protocol. At 7:45 p.m., you publicly humiliated your level 4 sommelier, Sarah, who correctly assessed that a $7,000 bottle of wine was perfectly sound. You not only overruled her professional expertise without even tasting the wine yourself, but you also cost this restaurant $14,000 in inventory, a loss you will no doubt attempt to bury in your operational budget under spoilage." Julian's face had gone from ashen to a ghastly mottled white. He was staring at her as if she were an oracle, reciting the ledger of his sins. "And now," Emma continued, her gaze unwavering, "you wish to fire the only employee who has maintained a professional demeanor in the face of sustained, deliberate, and escalating verbal abuse, which has now culminated in a physical assault." She gestured to the spaghetti on her uniform. "Tell me, Mr. Davies, in what management textbook is that considered an appropriate course of action?" You, Julian was sputtering, his brain completely overloaded. Charles Beaumont stepped forward, placing a hand on Julian's shoulder that was less a comfort and more a vice. "Mr. Davies," Charles said, his voice a low growl of controlled fury, "I suggest you stop talking. Immediately." He then turned back to Emma. "Miss Charlotte," he began, his voice laced with desperation. The Sentinel. I hired you, through my legal team, anonymously, of course, to give me the unvarnished truth about this establishment before I signed the final papers. Your reputation for discretion and thoroughness is legendary. I needed to know if L'Etoile was truly worthy of the Beaumont name. A wave of understanding and horror rippled through the onlookers who understood the name. The Sentinel, the ghost of the hospitality world, the kingmaker, and Chloe Beaumont had just thrown spaghetti at her. Emma slowly reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her small leather-bound notebook. It was slightly damp with pasta sauce. She opened it with a steady hand. Well, Mr. Beaumont, she said, her voice now crisp and authoritative, the voice of a CEO addressing her board. The unvarnished truth is that you are about to acquire a disaster. This is not a restaurant. It is a Potemkin village of luxury. It looks beautiful on the outside, but it is rotting from the core. And the rot, she said, finally letting her cold gaze fall upon Julian Davies, starts at the head. She flipped a page. Your staff turnover in the last 6 months is 42%, nearly triple the industry average for this tier of dining. Your junior staff, like Miguel, the busboy Mr. Davies threatened to fire this morning over a $2 plate, are terrified. Your senior staff, like Sarah, the sommelier with more knowledge in her little finger than Mr. Davies has in his entire body, are demoralized and actively looking for other jobs. I know this because 3 of them have told me so in the last week, believing me to be a fellow disgruntled employee. Julian made a small, strangled sound. Your food costs are inflated by 17%, Emma continued, relentless, reading from her notes. Because Mr. Davies here has a side deal with a produce supplier, his brother-in-law, I believe, who is overcharging him by a significant margin, a fact that a simple audit would have revealed had he not been bearing the invoices under miscellaneous kitchen expenses. You aren't just mismanaged, Mr. Beaumont. You're being robbed. Charles's face was now a mask of stone. He had paid for a report, and he was getting one, delivered live and in the most humiliating circumstances imaginable. He slowly took his hand off Julian's shoulder, as if touching him was a contamination. And then, Emma said, her voice dropping, there is the culture. The culture you foster, Mr. Davies, is one of fear and sycophancy. You teach your staff that the customer is always right, even when the customer is abusive, dishonest, and cruel. You have created an environment where a guest feels empowered to. She looked directly at Chloe for the first time, her eyes burning with a cold fire. To behave like a spoiled, petulant tyrant without consequence. Chloe, who had been watching this all unfold in a state of shock, finally found her voice. How dare you? You're just a waitress. You can't talk to me like that. Daddy, do something. I am doing something, Chloe, Charles said, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned to her, and for the first time in her life, she saw not a doting father, but a profoundly disappointed and furious stranger. I am listening to the expert I hired to prevent me from making a $100 million mistake. An expert whose counsel I value more than almost anyone's in her field. An expert whom you, in a fit of pique that would be embarrassing in a toddler, have just publicly assaulted and humiliated. He took a deep breath, the sound of a man steeling himself. This isn't just about a plate of pasta, Chloe. This is about judgment. It's about character. It's about the Beaumont name, a name my grandfather built from nothing, a name I have spent my life honoring. And you have dragged it through the mud, in front of everyone. He swept his arm out, indicating the entire room of silent witnesses, many of whom were now discreetly recording the entire affair on their phones. This display, he said, his voice thick with a disgust that was clearly aimed at his own flesh and blood, is the single greatest professional and personal embarrassment of my life. He turned away from his daughter, a gesture of dismissal more profound than any shouting match. He looked at Julian Davies, who was visibly trembling. Mr. Davies, Charles said, his voice flat and final, consider your employment and your brother-in-law's supply contract terminated, effective immediately. My security team will be here in 5 minutes to escort you from the premises. Do not touch anything in your office. Our forensic accountants will be in touch. Julian crumpled, all the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of a man. Then Charles turned back to Emma. He looked at her uniform, stained and ruined. He looked at her calm, composed face. "Ms. Charlotte," he said, his voice full of a genuine, painful remorse. "My report from you was supposed to be a private document. I am sorry it has become a public spectacle. As for the damage can be mitigated," Emma said, closing her notebook. She finally allowed herself a small, professional smile. It didn't quite reach her eyes. "But it will require a complete overhaul, a new manager, a new culture, and a clear message sent from the very top that the dignity of the staff is." The silence that followed Charles Beaumont's question was not an absence of noise, but a presence. It was a dense, heavy thing, a physical weight that pressed down on the 200 souls in L'Étoile, pinning them to their velvet seats. It was the sound of a universe reordering itself. Julian Davies, halfway between a supplicant's bow and a sprinter's crouch, looked as though he had been flash-frozen, a monument to miscalculation. Chloe Beaumont, her face a kabuki mask of rage and confusion, vibrated with an impotent fury, her entire reality having been inverted in the space of a single, whispered name. The Sentinel. Emma Charlotte, however, felt a strange and unwelcome calm descend upon her. The warm, greasy slide of spaghetti down her uniform, the sharp, pungent smell of truffle and parmesan, now mingled with the scent of her own public humiliation. It all receded. The initial shock, the hot flare of human anger at being so debased, had cooled into something far more familiar to her. The crystalline purity of data. This was the crescendo she had been observing, the final explosive data point in a 2-week study of systemic failure. She was no longer a victim. She was a scientist at the moment of a catastrophic, revelatory experiment. She raised a hand, not to wipe the sauce from her face, but to gently pluck a single errant strand of pasta from where it clung to her auburn hair. She let it drop, a final punctuation mark, onto the shattered porcelain at her feet. Then, and only then, did she raise her eyes to meet Charles Beaumont's. The meekness was gone, peeled away like a useless husk. What was left was the lucid, unnerving gaze of a person who sees things precisely as they are. "Fix this, Mr. Beaumont," she said, her voice devoid of the waitress's manufactured deference. It was a new voice in the room, calm and clear, with the resonance of absolute authority. The word "fix" implies that something is merely broken. What you have here is a terminal illness. You are asking for a cure when the patient requires an autopsy. Before Charles could process the brutal metaphor, Julian Davies, snapping out of his paralysis, made his final, fatal move. Survival instinct, stripped of all intelligence, took over. He lunged not toward his boss, but toward his perceived problem. "Security!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Get this woman out of here! She has created a disturbance. She is fired. Do you hear me? Fired!" Emma turned her head slowly to look at him. It was a movement of immense, deliberate weight, and under her gaze, Julian's blustering faded into a pathetic whimper. "You are firing the instrument your client hired to measure the pressure in the boiler, Mr. Davies," she said, her tone as cold and sharp as a scalpel. Just as the boiler is beginning to explode, an interesting, if predictable, management choice. She reached into the pocket of her soiled apron and withdrew her small leather-bound notebook. It was miraculously clean. She opened it. "Let us, for the record, document your final decisions as general manager. At 8:52 p.m., you attempted to terminate a contracted consultant after she was physically assaulted by your primary guest. This follows your decision at 7:45 p.m. to overrule and humiliate your sommelier, costing the establishment over $14,000, and your 7:15 p.m. decision to displace a United States Senator's reservation, creating a diplomatic liability. Collectively," she paused, looking up from her notes and directly into his terrified eyes, "it is the most comprehensive and rapid self-immolation of a career I have ever had the privilege to witness firsthand." A low gasp, a collective intake of breath swept the room. This was no longer a dinner service drama, it was a public execution. Charles Beaumont finally stepped forward, placing a hand not on Julian's shoulder, but on his chest, physically stopping him. It was a gesture of finality. "Mr. Davies," Charles said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "you will go to your office. You will sit in your chair. You will not touch the computer. You will not make any calls. You will wait for my head of security to arrive. Your professional life at this establishment is over. The only thing left to determine is whether your personal life will now involve a civil lawsuit for fraud. Do you understand me?" Julian looked from Charles's granite face to Emma's impassive one. He saw no escape. He nodded, a single spastic jerk of his head, then turned and walked away. A man suddenly hollowed out, his expensive suit now looking like a costume on a scarecrow. The room exhaled. Charles turned back to Emma, his face a ruin of conflicting emotions, fury, embarrassment, and a dawning, terrible respect. "Ms. Charlotte, you were saying, an autopsy." "Precisely," Emma said, her professional composure absolute. She was in her element now. "This restaurant, Mr. Beaumont, is a case study in the illusion of luxury. You have invested in damask tablecloths but not in human dignity. You have polished the silver but allowed the morale to tarnish. The sickness is in the culture. A culture where the staff are taught their only value is in their immediate utility to the guest. They are, as your daughter so eloquently put it, furniture that talks." She flicked her gaze for the first time toward Chloe. The girl flinched as if struck. "And when you create a culture that devalues its own people," Emma continued, her voice a lecturer's steady cadence, "you create a vacuum that will inevitably be filled by the worst impulses of your clientele. You did not simply buy a restaurant with a management problem, Mr. Beaumont. You were about to enshrine a temple dedicated to the celebration of unchecked privilege, and your daughter was its high priestess." "How dare you!" Chloe finally shrieked, the spell of silence broken. "You can't talk about me like that. Daddy, she's just a servant. You pay her. Make her stop." "I am paying her, Chloe," Charles said, his voice dangerously soft as he turned to face his daughter. And in his eyes, Chloe saw a look she had never seen before. Not disappointment, not anger, but a profound and chilling finality. It was the look of a man making a calculation on a spreadsheet, where the column labeled liability had finally outweighed the column labeled love. "I am paying her a sum that would cover your entire year's expenses to tell me the truth," he said. "And for the first time this evening, I am hearing it. You have never understood the difference between price and value. You know the price of a $7,000 bottle of wine, but you have no concept of the value of Sarah's expertise. You know the price of a designer dress, but you have no concept of the value of this woman's dignity." He took a step closer to her, his shadow falling over her. "My grandfather did not build an empire so that his great-granddaughter could behave like a petty monarch in a public restaurant. He built it on a foundation of respect. He knew the names of the men who swept his factory floors. He ate lunch with them. The Beaumont name was meant to be a symbol of quality and integrity, not a weapon for a spoiled child to wield against people she deems beneath her." His voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his rage. "Tonight, you did not just humiliate Ms. Charlotte. You did not just humiliate me. You took our family's name, a name built over 3 generations of sweat and honor, and you dragged it through a plate of spaghetti." He turned away from her, a complete and total dismissal. He addressed the room, his voice ringing with the authority that had built that empire. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for this educational disruption. Your meals are, of course, on the house. We will be closing temporarily to restructure. When L'Etoile reopens, it will be under new management and a new philosophy. I thank you for your patience." He then looked at Emma. "Miss Charlotte, I would appreciate a word in private, when you are ready." In the stark, fluorescent-lit locker room, the smell of disinfectant fought a losing battle against the lingering aroma of truffle oil clinging to Emma's uniform. Sarah, the sommelier, had gently guided her there, her hands trembling slightly as she handed Emma a warm, damp cloth. The rest of the staff kept their distance, watching with a mixture of awe, terror, and a fierce, burgeoning hope. "I've never seen anything like it," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion as Emma peeled off the soiled black jacket. For years, we've just had to swallow it. The insults, the condescension, Julian telling us to just smile and comp the champagne. You, you gave us a voice. I just read from my notes, Sarah, Emma said, her own voice betraying a slight tremor of post-adrenaline fatigue. She scrubbed at a smear of sauce on her cheek. The facts were on your side. They always were. He called you the Sentinel, Sarah said, the name a hushed legend. We used to tell stories about you, a ghost who walks the floors and sees everything. We thought it was just a way to scare new hires into folding napkins correctly. Emma allowed a small, weary smile. The reality is far less glamorous. It's mostly counting linens and timing how long it takes for a busboy to clear a table. No, Sarah said, her eyes meeting Emma's in the reflection of a locker door. The reality is that you make people see. He saw his daughter for the first time tonight. He saw Julian. He saw all of us. A soft, hesitant knock came at the door. Ms. Charlotte? Charles Beaumont's voice was tired, stripped of its public thunder. Sarah gave Emma a look of profound gratitude and slipped out a side door, leaving them alone. Emma, now in the simple gray t-shirt and dark slacks she wore under her uniform, opened the door. Charles Beaumont stood there, but he was a different man from the one who had entered the restaurant. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by an exhausted father. Behind him, a shadow in the doorway, was Chloe. Her makeup was a ruin. Her designer dress looked like a costume for a part she no longer knew how to play. The fire in her was gone, replaced by the gray ash of shock. My final report will be delivered to your office in 36 hours, Emma began, her tone all business. It will be comprehensive. I have no doubt, Charles interrupted gently, but I am not here as your client, Miss Charlotte. I am here as the man whose daughter assaulted you. No apology is sufficient, but I am offering one anyway, from the very core of my being. I am sorry. He seemed to expect her to say something, to absolve him, but Emma remained silent, her expression neutral. She was an observer. This was his reckoning, not hers. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. He turned to his daughter. Chloe, you will look Ms. Charlotte in the eye, and you will apologize for your behavior. Chloe's eyes lifted from the floor. They were red-rimmed and empty. What's the point? She whispered, her voice raw. You've already decided. I'm the villain. She's the hero. You've ruined my life. Your life? Charles's voice was incredulous. Your life of endless leisure, of limitless funds, of zero responsibility? That is what has been ruined? Good. It was a ruin to begin with. That's not fair. Chloe's voice rose, a last spark of her old self. You were never there. You just gave me money. You bought me things instead of spending time with me. You built this. This is your fault too. It was the classic final defense of the privileged child, and for a moment it struck home. Emma saw Charles flinch, a flicker of pain and guilt in his eyes. He had been an absent father. He had used money as a surrogate for love. He knew it. But Emma stepped forward, her voice cutting through the burgeoning family psychodrama. He may have provided the materials, Miss Beaumont, she said, her voice soft but firm. But you built the monster yourself. Both of them turned to look at her. There are millions of people in the world who have been neglected by their parents. Emma continued, her gaze fixed on Chloe. There are millions who have grown up with far less. They do not all become cruel. They do not all believe that their pain gives them a license to inflict it on others. That is a choice. You chose to humiliate the hostess. You chose to lie about the wine. You chose to throw that plate. Those were your choices, not his. She turned her attention to Charles. And you, Mr. Beaumont, you are not responsible for her choices tonight, but you are responsible for the environment that made her believe she could make them without consequence. This is your shared failure. The question is, what do you intend to build from its wreckage? The question hung in the sterile air of the locker room. Charles Beaumont looked at his daughter's tear-streaked, uncomprehending face, then at Emma's clear, unflinching one. He looked like a man who had been navigating by the wrong stars his entire life and had just been handed a true compass. First, he said, his voice regaining a measure of its strength, restitution. He looked at Emma. I am doubling your fee for this contract. Consider half of it a personal damage settlement. That is unnecessary, Emma said. Our contract is for the report. It is not a negotiation, Charles stated simply. Second, the restaurant. He took a deep breath. Your autopsy was correct. We gut it. We start over. Your recommendation from the report, whatever it is, will be my blueprint. I will be here myself every day until the culture is changed, until the name on the door means what it is supposed to mean. He paused, gathering himself for the hardest part. And third, Chloe. He turned to his daughter, his expression now one of deep, sorrowful resolve. As of tomorrow, your access to all family funds is terminated. The apartment, the car, the credit cards, they are gone. You will be given a small room in my house, a bed, and 3 meals a day. That is all. You can't do this to me, Chloe whimpered. Where will I go? What will I do? You will work, Charles said, the words falling like stones. You will get a job, not a vanity project at a gallery, a real job, a job where you serve others, a job where you are tired at the end of the day, a job where your own dignity depends on the kindness of strangers. He then looked back at Emma. Miss Charlotte, my contract with you is concluded. I would now like to offer you a new one. I want you to join the Beaumont Collection as a senior strategic advisor. Not in the shadows, on the board. I don't just need you to diagnose my problems. I need you to help me fix them. All of them. It was an extraordinary offer. A seat at the table of one of the world's most powerful luxury brands. A chance to implement her philosophy on a global scale. It was everything she had worked for. Emma was silent for a long moment. She looked at Charles, the humbled titan. She looked at Chloe, the fallen princess. This was not just a business proposition. It was an invitation to be part of their painful, necessary reconstruction. I will consider your offer, Mr. Beaumont, she said finally, but it is conditional. On my first official recommendation. Name it, he said without hesitation. Miss Beaumont's first service job, Emma said, her eyes locking with Chloe's horrified ones. We'll be here, at L'Etoile. She will start next Monday as a busgirl. She will report to the new general manager. She shifted her gaze to Charles, whom I recommend be Sarah, your sommelier. A strangled sob escaped Chloe's lips. It was a sentence worse than any she could have imagined. To be forced to return to the scene of her humiliation, not as a customer, but as the lowest-ranking member of the staff. To be invisible, to be furniture. Charles Beaumont looked at his daughter's broken expression. He saw the terror, the disbelief, the utter devastation. For a moment, the father's instinct to protect, to soften the blow, warred within him. But then he looked at Emma, and he saw the hard, clear path to redemption. It was a path that led through the fire, not around it. A slow, sad, but resolute smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a man accepting the full cost of his failure, and finally, beginning to pay the price. Accepted, he said. She starts Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. Leaving L'Etoile later that night, Emma Charlotte did not feel the thrill of victory. She walked out of the quiet staff entrance into the cool anonymity of the New York night, the city's electric hum a soothing balm. She felt the profound, aching weariness that always followed the completion of a job. Her work was to hold up a mirror to her clients. Tonight, the mirror had not just reflected a flawed business, it had reflected a broken family, a corrupted soul. The reflection had been so ugly it had shattered the glass. She had set events in motion that would change lives, ruin one career and make another, and perhaps, just perhaps, begin the arduous process of rebuilding a young woman's character from the ground up. She was not a ghost in the machine anymore. She was the architect of its redesign. But as she merged into the river of unknown faces flowing down the avenue, she felt the immense, solitary weight of her purpose. She saw the cracks in everything, the hidden rot beneath the gilded surfaces, and she knew that her work, the quiet, thankless, and utterly necessary work of seeing, was never ever done.